Hello, this is Peter Falk, and you're listening to the Columbo Files on the Ludic Lounge, hosted by Antonicus Maximus and John Soares.
Hello, good listeners, and welcome to what is not a proper file, but file management for the Columbo Files. I am one of your hosts, John Soares, and with me, as always, is my podcast partner and my brother from another mother, the man, the myth, the booty, the legend himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus the Fourth. Say howdy to our listeners, Anthony.
Howdy to our listeners, Anthony.
I appreciate you went extra nasal with it.
Absolutely. Now, to our loyal listeners sitting at home, as John so eloquently mentioned, tonight's episode is a sub-file in the Columbo Files as a whole. Today, as you notice, as we went into all of our episodes, we typically give a breakdown of the actors. We purposely have skipped Peter Falk every time because we wanted to do a little mini tribute, if you will, to what he has done for Hollywood and what he has done for us personally via his vehicles in Hollywood.
That is right, Anthony. And as everyone noticed in Blueprint for Murder, the sole episode that Peter Falk has directing credit on, not just for Columbo, but for his entire career, we decided it was a perfect opportunity to do a deep dive into the man that this show honestly comes to define, Peter Falk. So, Anthony, I think we can stop bearing the lead. I think we should just get down to it. So, Peter Falk, our director, what do you got for him, Anthony?
So, Peter Falk, John, started his Hollywood career, credited on IMDb, of course, is where I'm gathering this information. Started it as early as 1957 on the Robert Montgomery Presents TV series. Yes. And on top of that, and as all of our loyal listeners know, typically when I read what they're most notable from, it's something that I would recognize being the typical layman of our duo. So, without further ado, he was also in John Wind Across the Everglades in 1958 as the writer, quote-unquote. He was in The Bloody Brew, the 1959 movie starring as Nico. And John, did you know that he was in 1960's Pretty Boy Floyd as Shorty Walters?
No, I didn't, but now I do. And more importantly, though, I think we get to the movie that ultimately gave him the jump start to getting to where he ended up. Murder, Inc., Anthony, where he played mob hitman Abe Relis. And Anthony, did you know that this part was so acclaimed, Peter Falk earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for this part?
I did not know that particular tidbit, John, but one thing I did know about this movie and what I want people to know about this movie is that it depicts the rise and fall of a 1930s Brooklyn crime syndicate known as Murder Incorporated, led by mobster Lepke Buckhalter, which I probably butchered.
I mean, it is what it is. Funny enough, he reprised that role in a TV show, Anthony.
Did he really?
Yes, he did. He reprised it in a TV show called The Witness. So he played Abe Relis twice. And, in the feature film, he was able to get the Academy Award. And something that I'm going to pull from his Wikipedia here. There's a nice little description on Peter's performance. So Bosley Crowther was a New York Times film critic. He dismissed Murder, Inc. as an average gangster movie, but singled out Peter Falk. And he said, quote, Mr. Falk, moving as if weary, looking at people out of the corners of his eyes and talking as if he had borrowed Marlon Brando's chewing gum, seems a travesty of a killer until the water suddenly freezes in his eyes and he whips an ice pick from his pocket and starts punching holes in someone's ribs. Then viciousness pours out of him, and you get a sense of a villain who is hopelessly cracked and corrupt. I think that description alone describes why this was a breakout role for Peter Falk, Anthony. He was able to find such depths of emotion and able to portray such complicated figures as, well, I wouldn't say complicated, or rather vicious figures as a mob hitman so well that he elevates an entire film around him.
Oh, I can absolutely see that, John. Again, I have not watched Murder, Inc. per se, or if I have, it's been many a year and I can't remember much of it. But if I know anything about our dear trench coat wielding detective, which is Peter Falk, he always is, I shouldn't say always, but for the most part in all of his performances, he never feels as though he's just cashing in. He always feels as though he gives a little bit extra to some of his performances.
I would agree to that to a certain extent. I think, going through Columbo this time around with the mindset of we're looking at it in both a critical eye and just revisiting it because we want to, and we have to because of the show. There are times where he does seem checked out, and I think that the circumstances around him definitely dictate that. I think Deadweight is the perfect example of, but the Deadweight is also very complicated in that he set upon a lot of the issues of that episode by his own making. So
yes, and agreed, John. But what I guess what I should say is that even in performances where he may, quote unquote, be checking out or putting the check in the mail, as some people say, it still doesn't feel that way. Because, comparing to other actors who are mailing stuff in, I like to bring to attention in Superman. Whoa, let me try that again. In Superman with Marlon Brando's performance as Jor-El and saying Krypton instead of Krypton, and just his kind of lazy dialogue deliveries.
My son Kal-El, I send you forth from this planet Krypton. I didn't know I can do a Marlon Brando as Jor-El.
That is excellent Marlon Brando, an excellent limited fake, sir. See, now you're the man of 9 voices.
Thank you, citizen. I have to make an appearance because I hear people like this voice. But I digress. Back to the issue at hand.
Now, the issue at hand, John, is that Peter Falk also starred in another movie in the year 1961, which he got another Academy Award nod, which is Pocketful of Miracles, where he played Joy Boy.
Yes, that's right. This was the last feature film of director Frank Capra. And Frank Capra was an Italian-American film director who was the creative force behind some of the most award-winning films during the 1930s and 1940s. Among his leading films are industry classics such as It Happened One Night, You Can't Take It With You, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
That one is an excellent movie.
And probably the thing that he will be known for the rest of time, It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes, that will live on in infamy.
Now, interesting thing about Pocketful of Miracles, it was like I said, it was Capra's last picture. And I'm telling this story because it's reflective of, I think, the popular perception of Peter Falk. But it's a nice story that I think our listeners would be inclined to hear. So according to Frank Capra's autobiography, he said that the film wasn't the commercial success he was hoping it would be, but he gushed about Peter Falk. He said that I quote, "The entire production was agony except for Peter Falk. He was my joy, my anchor to reality. Introducing that remarkable talent to the techniques of comedy made me forget pains, tired blood, and maniacal hankerings to murder Glenn Ford, the film star. Thank you, Peter Falk." Peter Falk would then describe how Capra worked with his actors. And I'd also, if you would allow me the ability to tell the story, Falk said he never worked with, and I quote again from Wikipedia that is pulling from a celebrity interview from 2004 with Peter Falk. Falk, quote, "never worked with a director who showed greater enjoyment of actors and the acting craft. There's nothing more important to an actor to know that the one person who represents the audience to you, the director, is responding well to what you're trying to do." And Falk goes on to recall that Capra had the cast run through a whole scene after he had already yelled "cut and print." And for those unfamiliar with film terminology, cut and print means the scene's done, we're moving on, we're not going to retake it, we're not going to refilm it. And Falk asked Capra why he wanted it reshot, and Capra, quote, "he laughed and said that he loved the scene so much he just wanted to see us do it again. How's that for support?" Unquote.
Aww.
Now, also, I'm very tempted to just do the Peter Falk voice, but I figure that's too much.
Maybe not for every particular one, but I do enjoy your Peter Falk, so please don't feel like you have to pocket it at all.
Oh, well, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's support like that, good sir, that keeps me going. Keeps me in this trench coat. Keeps me in cigars, don't you know?
Peter Falk also starred in not just cinema, John, but he also did TV appearances, such as a TV series by the name of Naked City, and from 58 to 62, where he played a various amount of characters. He was also in the Alfred Hitchcock Hour in an episode in 1962.
Also, he was in the Twilight Zone, Anthony.
Yes, he was. As I was getting up to that, John, please go into it.
Yeah, he played a Castro-type revolutionary, complete with a full beard, in the episode titled The Mirror. This revolutionary becomes intoxicated with power, and he keeps seeing his would-be assassins in this supernatural mirror. The two episodes of Alfred Hitchcock's TV shows, one of them which, in 1961, he starred as a gangster terrified of death, and a homicidal evangelist in 1962.
Huh. Well, I'll be.
Yes. He also was nominated for an Emmy, Anthony.
Ooh, please do tell.
He was nominated for an Emmy in an episode titled Cold Turkey of The Law and Mr. Jones, which was a short-lived TV show on ABC. It was a legal drama, Anthony. It only ran for about 2 seasons and then got canned.
Oh.
But also in this show was Leo Penn, father of Sean Penn.
Interesting.
And Joyce Van Patten, the sister of Dick Van Patten, who is an actor, comedian, known as the patriarch Tom Bradford in the comedy drama 8 is Enough.
Well, all right.
All I'm doing here, Anthony, is just giving support for my theory that somebody else came up with, but I believe wholeheartedly that every single TV show is connected somehow.
Well, John, here on the Columbo Files, presented by the Ludic Lounge, it's your theory.
Yes, I will take it.
Now, John, speaking of things that are not theories, Peter Falk starred in the movie It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World as the third cab driver, which a lot of folks at home might know him for. And that was in the year 1963. And as we move on, or not, because John's got a little tidbit.
No, yeah, I just wanted to talk about It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, because Peter Falk has such a very tiny spot in that movie. He doesn't show up until the last, like, maybe fourth of that movie. And what I'd like our listeners to know, and for the younger people in the crowd, it was a comedy film in 1963 that was a star-studded cast. It was filled with the big names at the time doing full-on comedy extravaganzas. The movie is about the madcap pursuit of $350,000 in cash. And it stars Edie Adams, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman, Mickey Rooney, Jonathan Winters.
Jeez, the who's who.
The who's who at the time, and even smaller cameo parts here and there. Don Knotts is in this. Buster Keaton shows up at one point.
Oh, it's Don Knotts. That's my limited fake Don Knotts. I hope you all enjoy.
All I had for Don Knotts. Don't ask me to do Don Knotts again. The Three Stooges are in this freaking movie, Anthony.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Jack Benny as well. I'm just trying to find Bob Hope so I can do my Bob Hope for you.
I can give you that out, as he did star in a Bob Hope vehicle.
Ooh.
But it's coming up right now where I tell you. But before I tell you what he's starring with Bob Hope, John, did you know Peter Falk was in The Great Race?
What?
He was in The Great Race as Maximilian Mean in 1965. Now, for those of you loyal listeners at home that aren't familiar, The Great Race in 1965 starred Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, and its synopsis essentially is: in the early 20th century, two rivals, the heroic Leslie and the despicable Professor Fate, engage in an epic automobile race from New York to Paris.
And it sounds like this. Spartacus, I'm going to get you, Spartacus.
Yes.
I'm Tony Curtis. I'm going to Paris to get you, Spartacus, because I love you.
I set that up hoping you pick up on it.
I was going to surprise you with it, to be quite honest.
Oh, because God damn it, I love your Tony Curtis. And there goes our E.
Spartacus, it's okay. I understand the passion, Spartacus. Cry out in passion, Spartacus, because I love you, Spartacus.
Hey, Maximilian Mean, we gotta go bing a boom and get in this great race and then go pick up a meatball sub when we get to New York.
Hey, Spartacus, we got to do the bong and a boom and a who and a how all the way down to the Coliseum to get a meatball sub. Spartacus. Spartacus, where's Natalie Wood? What did you do to...
Let's not go into that.
I wasn't even doing that. I wasn't getting there. I was just doing it because it's like they're racing, so she went away because she's racing.
Oh,
don't you put that evil on me. If I meant it to be bad, I would have said it like Chris Walken.
Oh God, who was on that boat? Funny
what?
Enough.
No.
All right, I gotta move past.
No, but I understand your confusion.
I gotta move past this. Jeez Louise. John from 1960. Stop it. I'm not going to be able to get through this. I'm trying to give you another segue. Damn it.
No, I'm sorry.
John, did you know that Peter Falk in 1963 to 1966 starred in the TV series Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater as a few different characters there?
Bob Hope, everybody. Bob Hope, giving a little guy named Peter Falk a little hope. Bob Hope, everybody. Bob Hope.
And there's your Bob Hope segue. But John, Peter Falk was also, and we've talked about this in our first episode, he was in the TV movie Prescription Murder as our beloved Lieutenant Columbo.
That is correct. That is his first appearance as the good lieutenant, and then would pick up the role once again later on in the intro episode, Ransom for a Dead Man opposite Lee Grant. And I believe, what was it, 1970, 1971?
71, I believe.
Yeah. And then the TV show proper starts in 1971 as part of the NBC mystery movie series that runs from 1971 to 1978, and moves to ABC from 1989 to 2003 in a much less regular fashion, but still the same old lieutenant that we know and love.
Yes. Now, John, we talked about him starring in that first initial, well, technically the second pilot, but the first pilot in the actual series that he picked up, which Steven Spielberg directed. And one thing that I just want to mention since we were talking about this is, upon his death, Steven Spielberg was interviewed, and there is a beautiful quote that he gave regarding Peter Falk. Steven Spielberg said, quote, "I learned more about acting from him at that early stage of my career than I had from anybody else."
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, coming from Spielberg, who worked with some of the most prestigious talents you can ever, list, from, Harrison Ford, Sean Connery, and so on, Drew Barrymore among others. It's a testament to the craft that Peter Falk put into his work. And something that Peter Falk, I believe, said either in an interview or his autobiography, which I would highly recommend. His autobiography is entitled Just One More Thing. It's just, of course, it had to be there.
It's definitely on my docket for sure. That is one I need to actually read.
I read it a couple years ago, and it is as warm and as endearing as you expect it to be. It is very much, I think, just transcribed audio. Somebody just sitting down with Peter Falk and just like, let's talk about certain things. And then he would just pontificate, and whoever would be listening would just transcribe it. But this comes from from that same 25-year celebrity interview from 2004 that I mentioned earlier. Peter Falk tried to analyze Columbo and noted correlation between his own personality and Columbo's personality. He goes on to say, "I'm a Virgo Jew, and that means I have an obsessive thoroughness. It's not enough to get most of the details. It's necessary to get all of them. I've been accused of perfectionism. When Lou Wasserman, the head of Universal Studios, Peter Becken, said that Falk is a perfectionist, I don't know whether it was out of affection or because he felt I was a monumental pain in the ass."
God damn it. That's such a Peter Falk line, man.
Yeah. That, I think, is just an example, or, it's directly from the horse's mouth, it's Falk saying, I like to have every single detail. I need to think through what I'm doing. And as an actor, that must be invaluable, because now you're just constantly thinking, what is the motivation here? What would this person do? What would this person be doing outside of this situation? How would they be acting as a person? And that would bring invaluable depth to a character, because you're just looking beyond what the scene is calling for and looking for what the character as a person is calling for.
Yeah. No, absolutely, John. And speaking of that, I'm going to jump back into some of the more things he started. Now, in the 1970s, a majority of the time, of course, was dedicated towards Columbo, as that was his main vehicle. But he also starred in other TV episodes as well as movies. For example, he starred in 1970s Husbands, starring as Archie Black. He also starred in A Woman Under the Influence in the year 1974 as Nick Longetti.
I'm glad you brought up these movies, Anthony, because they also pertain to an important person in Peter Falk's life and to our first season 2 episode. Both Husbands and A Woman Under the Influence are drama films written and directed by actor-director John Cassavetes. And Cassavetes was a longtime friend to Falk. And he's also an independent film pioneer, because he was one of the first people in the industry to use his success and finances as an actor to fund and set up for distribution his own work in film. I haven't seen any of Cassavetes' films, but I'm familiar enough with his relationship with Falk that it's important to mention here.
Oh, absolutely, John. Absolutely. And speaking of other films Falk starred in the 70s, he starred in 1978's The Chief Detective as Lou Peckinpah, which essentially is kind of he plays a PI, of course, in the years 1940s in I believe, San Francisco. And it has still a lot of feeling of Columbo in it. It's a fun movie.
I don't think he could ever really fully escape from that. There's another quote from that same interview where Falk notes that the show's all over the world. That he's been to villages in Africa with maybe one TV set, and the kids will run up shouting to him, "Columbo, Columbo."
Yeah.
And there's a reason that we're still talking about him as Columbo today. It's just it's both him and not him, and is so wrapped up in him that you can't separate the two.
No, absolutely not. It would be like trying to separate, rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen from rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
You just can't really. They're both synonymous.
No, absolutely.
And things that I didn't think were synonymous, John. Peter Falk in the 80s, in 1981 to be more specific, did you know he but he was in The Great Muppet Caper?
Yeah, he played a homeless person.
He played a homeless person. I did not know that, and makes me want to rewatch this movie.
Yeah, it's one of those really, really small Muppet cameos. It's just like, hey, look, it's this scene celebrity.
Yeah, and again, just speaking of little cameos and things I never knew, and we talked about this off air right before we jumped in. John, in 1984, apparently he has a cameo in Ray Parker Jr.'s Ghostbusters music video.
I bet you dollars to dimes, or however the phrase goes. I'm just going to make up a new
dollars
phrase.
To donuts, but yes.
Whatever. I bet you he's just playing Columbo.
Yeah, I mean, more than likely.
I bet you he's just playing Columbo. There's one movie I'd like to mention that I think you jumped over, and that's The In-Laws with Alan Arkin.
Yes, I did jump over that. Go ahead, John.
That is a fantastic movie. It is a comedy where Peter Falk plays the father of a man who is marrying a young woman, and Peter Falk is a ex-CIA agent and meets his soon-to-be relative, Sheldon P. Cornpet, a dentist, and shenanigans ensue.
What was that name again?
Let me see. Sheldon P. Cornpet.
Oh my God.
Think of all the gums that are gonna be left unhelped if you kill this man.
Oh,
Cut to Alan Arkin. That's it. The dental thing. I'm a dead man.
Now,
So
John,
Peter Falk's performance is very well known here because he is a questionable CIA ex-CIA agent of dubious sanity. So he would just do crazy things, and Alan Arkin would just go, "What?"
gosh, that makes so much sense, though. Ugh.
Yeah. But do you want to know how they got that movie, Anthony?
I would love to know that, John.
So, the director Arthur Hiller, in a book called The Director's Take Two, said during an interview that the film started out because Alan Arkin and Peter Falk wanted to work together. So they went to Warner Brothers and said, "We'd like to do a picture," and Warner said, "Fine."
Okay.
Yeah. And then
I
it
guess.
got remade with Michael Douglas, and then Albert Brooks, and apparently it was nowhere near as good, but that's not surprising.
But John,
Yes, Anthony.
before I jump into the most noted movie that I know him from and was introduced to him from, and I would assume you did as well, was there any
Yes.
other movies from the 80s that you want to talk about before I jump into this movie?
Actually, yeah. There is a German language film directed by Wim Wenders. It is a romantic fantasy movie called Wings of Desire. And it is about angels who populate Berlin and listen to humanity and comfort the distressed. And Peter Falk plays himself, except himself in this movie is a former angel who gave up his immortality to be closer to humanity. And I haven't seen this film, but from everything I've heard about it, it is an intensely beautiful and moving film. And I'm not surprised that Peter Falk is tied to such a movie and that his performance got such acclaim as it got. I get the feeling at some point, Anthony, once we're done with the Columbo episodes proper, we're probably going to turn into a Peter Falk retrospective podcast.
It might be, and you know what? I'm wholeheartedly okay with that, John. And speaking of a Peter Falk retrocast, John, his most notable in my eyes, where I was introduced to him proper, was playing the grandfather and narrator of 1987's film adaptation of The Princess Bride.
Directed by Rob Reiner, son of the late Carl Reiner, starring Cary Elwes, Robin Wright, Mandy Patinkin, Chris Sarandon, Wallace Shawn, Andre the Giant, Christopher Guest, and Fred Savage. Honestly, this is an astounding.
And you left out Billy Crystal too, John. That's how stacked this movie is.
That's how stacked this movie is. It's insane. This movie is insane. I think at this point, most people have seen this movie, outside of the people who are very young and probably just haven't gotten to it for whatever reason. But Anthony, I'll let you talk about it a little bit more since you have a stronger relation to it.
So, John, for those of maybe the younger listeners or maybe the older listeners that never got a chance to watch this movie, the synopsis is, while a boy is homesick in bed, Fred Savage, and his grandfather, played by Peter Falk essentially reads him the story of a farm boy turned pirate who encounters numerous obstacles, enemies, and allies in his quest to be reunited with his true love. And John, this movie, upon release, did not do very well at all in theaters. It was, you could call it a total box office flop.
And that seems to be a case with a lot of the very popular movies now that came out of the 80s. When you say that, it makes me think of Blade Runner and how when Blade Runner came out, it was a almost universally disdained and obvious failure. And now it is one of the most highly regarded science fiction films of its time.
Oh, absolutely. Revolutionized science fiction from the 80s on.
Yeah, and I would argue same with Princess Bride and just in filmmaking in general. I think there's few movies that balance that sense of adventure and comedy and romance as well as that movie did.
And that's the theme, John, romance. Again, you have to also remember this is the 1980s, so it was all about big guns and even bigger stars as far as action stars, right? and it was always the man throwing violence in the way, punching, kicking, shooting, whatever his way to get the girl who was just an object to be won. But in this film, John, in The Princess Bride, it is a clever person, again, played by Carey Hughes, and this clever person, because of his love and the love he feels for this particular woman, he goes above and beyond, faces literally death to just be with this one person again. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with sex or anything like that. It's literally just he wants to spend his rest of his life with this one woman. And it's just such a beautiful thing that you rarely get to see in Hollywood. And that's what resonated with me so strongly. And not only that, John, but there are action scenes. He does fight. And the swordsmanship, honestly, between Mandy Patinkin and Carey Hughes in this particular movie is fantastic. I must have watched that sword fight a million times.
It's highly regarded as one of the best filmed fight productions in history. I think, if I recall, it might have revolutionized how those types of scenes were filmed. But that's just me kind of guessing off the top of my head.
And again, what pops into my mind is it was swordsmanship and not of like Conan the Barbarian that you would see in the 80s. This was fencing, literally fencing.
Swashbuckling at its finest.
Yeah, and amazingly done at that, John. But while Peter Falk wasn't in the actual story per se, he was just the narrator, just the tender love that he shows for his grandson, especially at the end. And he goes from being cantankerous with his young grandson, because all his grandson wants to do is play his Nintendo Entertainment System, being homesick in the 80s, as one did. And he eventually becomes this, you see him as this cantankerous grandparent to the where he slowly breaks down the barriers and the age gap between him and his grandson to where at the end, and the final line you see of this movie is him saying, "As you wish," to his young grandson, when his young grandson asks if grandpa can come over again and read this book. And I'm getting choked up just thinking about it, which is why my voice sounds so raw. But it's just literally, if you haven't watched this or haven't watched this movie in like 5-10 years, do yourselves a favor, do us a favor here at the Ludic Lounge. Just watch this movie. Watch it from the perception that you have now and just enjoy yourself.
And be sure to tell us about it at all our social media handles, because we want to talk to you about it. We like talking to people.
100%.
Let's all cry together.
Oh, you are not wrong there, John. Oh.
No, I am not.
And speaking of things that that is not wrong, Peter Falk also starred in many other movies past the 80s into the 90s and beyond, John.
That is correct. Are we going to mention some of these pieces of crap?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of touch upon ones here and there.
I only say, no disrespect meant, to be honest. I'm just trying to be in good fun. But like one of these is Corky Romano.
Yeah, that was in the year 2001. And, Peter Falk was Peter Falk. And that movie was that movie. I mean, it's... Yeah. So in the 90s, nothing out of the ordinary as far as something that stood out like Princess Bride. He starred in Tune In Tomorrow as Pedro Carmichael, Roommates as Rocky Holzcheck, Cops and Roberts as Salvatore Santini, which is a great name. And
right.
Again, into the 2000s, we mentioned Corky Romano. He was also in Undisputed as Mindy Ripstein. He was still doing Columbo, John, all the way up until 2003 in the very last episode of Columbo Likes the Nightlife.
Indeed. Yes, Anthony.
What I was shocked to find out, in the mid-2000s, he starred in the movie Shark Tale as Don Feinberg. Shark Tale, the Will Smith car wash movie, essentially. Like, that's the plot.
That's the fish car wash movie that is trying to be with, like, did it come out around the time of Finding Nemo? I don't remember.
If it wasn't right directly, it was maybe just a little after. But this was when Pixar. I don't even know if this is Pixar, to be honest.
I think it's a DreamWorks.
I think it's a DreamWorks. Yeah,
it's DreamWorks. Yeah, it's DreamWorks.
But it was like DreamWorks' attempt to, combat Finding Nemo and kind of raise off the popularity of that. And it's not an awful movie. It was a cute movie for its time. Definitely a kid's movie, and there's some clever things they do with it. But again, it just me finding out that Peter Falk was in that. I haven't watched this movie in probably since it came out in around mid 2000s, John. But just seeing that, I want to rewatch this movie just to hear Peter Falk in his eldership before he unfortunately stopped his acting career with the last thing in 2009 of American Cowslip as Father Randolph, according to IMDb.
But Anthony, you skipped over the 2007 sci-fi action thriller starring Nicolas Cage.
What?
Next. Yep. In 2007, immediately before his final role, he starred in an adaptation, a very loose adaptation of the Philip K. Dick story. And for those of you keeping count at home, Philip K. Dick is also the sci-fi writer who came up with Do You Dream of Electric Sheep, which was the inspiration for Blade Runner.
Do androids dream of electric sheep?
Do androids dream of electric sheep? Thank you, Anthony. That's why I keep you around. Plus, you're so pretty. Next is the adaptation of the Phil K. Dick story, The Golden Man, and is about a small-time magician who has limited precognition and can see into the very immediate future, and then he becomes wanted by terrorists and the FBI who want him to help them fight terrorists. It was directed by Lee Tamahori, who directed Pierce Brosnan's last outing as James Bond.
Oh, that's why. Because you mentioned this movie, I'm looking at the poster. I'm like, this has a feel, and I can't quite place it, but it looks exactly like Peter Brosnan's last James Bond film. The exact poster.
It is very much within that era of that dying era, because at this point, the Bond had already rebooted with Daniel Craig. But Peter Falk plays the character Irv.
Just Irv.
I believe he is the father character to Nick Cage's Chris Johnson. I'm more of a precognitive protector.
Oh my God. I didn't even know you did a limited fake Nick Cage, but that's not bad.
I mean, it would be crazy. And at the end of the day, man, it just sounds like Thurston Howell III.
A little bit, but it's not far off.
Yeah. No, come in, loser. We're going to go steal the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, jeez. John, we already mentioned that he starred in his last role in the year 2009, and it wasn't much after that, I should say, that he unfortunately passed away.
Yes, that is true. In between that, he was working throughout the early 2000s, that first decade of the 2000s. He started a trilogy of these are just a couple of notes that I'm adding on to what you've already put down so well, Anthony. Similar to his role in Wings of Desire, he played an angel in a trilogy of 3 TV holiday movies. A Town Without Christmas, Finding John Christmas, and When Angels Come to Town. He played the angel Max, a guardian angel who would just set people back on a path. And those were some of the last things he was doing outside of the number of films he did from 2005 to 2009. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2008, December 2008. And this is going to be a little lengthy story, but I think it's important to note this in Peter's legacy, because it is something that I think when I learned about it, it was very sad, and I'm also kind of glad that he's still kind of protecting people in some way. In June 2009, there was a 2-day conservatorship trial in Los Angeles, and we learned through there that apparently Peter rapidly slipped into dementia following a series of dental operations in 2007. But it's unclear if that condition had worsened because of a reaction to the anesthesia or some other reaction. His second wife, Shara, was appointed as his conservator, and on June 23rd, 2011, Peter Falk passed away at the age of 83, primarily due to pneumonia, with complications of Alzheimer's being a second and underlying cause. He is buried at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. And in 2015, legislation was passed, Anthony, in New York State called Peter Falk's laws. And what these laws are supposed to do are protect children from being cut off from news of serious medical and end-of-life developments or from contact. In Falk's case, according to his eldest daughter, Catherine, who, awesome enough, is a PI, or was a PI at some point.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Shara Denise Falk, Peter's second wife, his conservator, allegedly stopped some of Peter's family members from visiting him and did not notify them of the major changes in his condition and didn't notify them of his death and funeral arrangements. Catherine's encouraged the passage of legislation called the Peter Falk's Law, and it sets guidelines regarding visitation rights and notice of death, with which an incapacitated person's guardians or conservators must comply. 15 states have enacted such legislation as of 2020. So I guess in some way, Columbo lives on and gives people some kind of semblance of peace when their incapacitated elderly loved ones are on the verge of passing.
Which is amazing. That he's still not only is touching lives via his entertainment career, but he's actually touching lives with, actually affecting states legislature. 15 states, man. Like that's an amazing feat within itself to get one state, but to follow 14 other ones, that's amazing.
Within 5 years, and we all know how difficult it is to pass laws in this country.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Anthony, I have a couple of little small things about his pre-acting life that I just like to add before we get into, I think, our final thoughts on what Peter Falk means to us.
Absolutely.
So Peter Falk, contrary to the Italian character of Columbo, was Jewish, born to Michael and Madeline Falk in Ossining, New York. He lost his right eye at a young age to retinoblastoma, which was a rare cancer, or is a rare cancer, I should say, that rapidly develops from immature cells within the retina, and has primarily occurred within young children. And there's a funny story about this eye that Peter Falk likes to tell. He told it in his autobiography, and he also told it in various interviews. He was playing in high school baseball, and he got called out at third base, and he was so sure he was safe. He was so sure. And to quote him, "I got so mad. I took out my glass eye and I handed it to the umpire and said, 'Here, try this. You need it more than I do.'"
That's amazing. Oh,
right? His first stage appearance, Anthony, was at the age of 12.
Really?
Yes, at camp.
Yeah, well, I mean,
so I only mention that because he appeared in an adaptation of the Gilbert and Sullivan comic opera, The Pirates of Penzance.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and funny enough, one of his camp counselors at this Camp High Point, where he made his first stage appearance, was Ross Martin.
Really?
Ross Martin, for everyone at home, is the murderer in the Columbo episode, Suitable for Framing, and they also acted together in The Great Race.
That makes a lot of sense, and why they had great chemistry in that episode.
Indeed. So he also joined the Merchant Marines after, he tried to join the armed services, but was rejected because he was missing an eye. He joined the Merchant Marines and served as a cook and a mess boy. And his recollection between an interview and his autobiography is as follows. This is his description of his experiences as a merchant marine. There, they don't care if you're blind or not. The only one on a ship who has to see is the captain. And in the case of the Titanic, he couldn't see very well either.
Oh, Peter.
So he stayed with the Merchant Marines for about a year and a half. He never really saw combat, so he was on the water, aiming, just going place to place, never really seeing much. But I mean, it's to be expected. He was just a Merchant Marine. They weren't really going to be seeing combat. He ended up going back to New York, getting his bachelor's degree in literature and political science. Ended up going after a Master of Public Administration degree, which was a program designed to train civil servants, and he had no aptitude for it, so he didn't follow through with it. He also applied for the CIA, Anthony.
I did read that, John.
Yes, but there's because apparently this is a thing that happens. So if you were joining the Merchant Marine Corps, you were automatically included in the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union. So despite Peter Falk only being required to join, not making a choice to join, and despite him not being active in that union, he was denied employment with the CIA because the union had been under fire for communist leanings.
Yes. And that's unfortunate, honestly.
I mean, at a certain point, you just have to expect that if something goes sideways, it's probably some McCarthyist idiot yelling commies.
Yeah. But John,
yes, Anthony.
He also was an avid and accomplished artist.
Yes, he was. There is a collection of Columbo short stories written by, I believe, William Link that features Columbo's or a portrait of Columbo that is drawn by Peter Falk himself.
Yep. He took art classes at the Art Students League of New York for many years. And in October 2006, he had an exhibition of his drawings at the Butler Institute of American Art. And I found that to be amazing.
I just picture him going, look at all this. Isn't that neat?
Yeah. And also, alongside with him being an art aficionado, he was also an aficionado of chess, John.
I'm not surprised at all.
Makes total sense, right?
Do you know how he got his acting career jump-started?
No, I do not.
Well, he lived in Hartford, Connecticut for a time, and he was a management analyst with the Connecticut State Budget Bureau and lived in Hartford. He described it as being an efficiency expert, and his description of that is, quote, I was such an efficiency expert that the first morning on the job, I couldn't find the building where I was to report for work. Naturally, I was late, which I always was in those days, but ironically, it was my tendency never to be on time that got me started as a professional actor. Now, that sets me up for this story. He joined a community theater group called the Mark Twain Maskers, where he performed in a number of plays, one of which was The Crucible. And while working with this community actor group, he ended up in acting classes that were conducted by actress Ava Le Gallienne, who was a British-born stage actress who worked on and off Broadway, both as an actor and a director, among other things. This class, though, was in Westport, and he just showed up. He lied his way in. The class was only for professionals. He was not a professional. So he drove from Westport, Connecticut, from Hartford, Connecticut, and was always late. And Peter Falk describes this and I just realized where this interview came from. A 1997 interview with Arthur Marks in Cigar Aficionado magazine.
Yes.
Which I'm not surprised. He described an instance with Eva saying, one evening when I arrived late, she looked at me and asked, young man, why are you always late? And I said, I have to drive down from Hartford. She looked down her nose and said, what do you do in Hartford? There's no theater there. How do you make a living acting? And that's when the lie broke. Peter Falk said, I'm not a professional. And she looks at him sternly and says, well, you should be.
Oh, that's so sweet.
He drove back to Hartford, quit his job, and then eventually got himself an agent and moved up to New York City and started doing Broadway. well, it started off Broadway, then ended up on Broadway, and then it led to various film roles. And from there, the rest is history. Also, do you know he was in Glengarry Glen Ross?
No.
He apparently later on in his career, in 1998, he no. I am misquoting a different play. In 1986, he played the Jack Lemmon part. And I only say Jack Lemmon because it's the character Jack Lemmon played in the movie adaptation of Glengarry Glen Ross. Shelley Levine. So the main salesman who is about to kind of implode because he's old and not with the job anymore.
Well, I'll be. And John, I know we mentioned how well he did in Columbo and everything, but he was nominated and even won some Emmys. He was nominated for Academy Awards, Golden Globes even. He won in 1973 as Best Actor in television series drama for Columbo, his work in Columbo. So he was a highly touted actor on the silver screen and had some fun on the big screen. And I think that is why even he was just such a world icon that for some reason there's a statue of Peter Falk as Columbo with his dog in Budapest, Hungary for some reason.
I think that's just a testament to how pervasive Columbo was. And I think, Anthony, if you have no more tidbits to add, I think we can go into our final thoughts with a segment titled Just One More Thing.
And just one more thing.
Joe, just one more thing, Anthony. I think it's time to bring this file management to a close and talk about what Peter Falk means to us both.
I think, John, as a younger man, he meant to me being that icon of a grandfatherly type of person. That person where, he could be a little cantankerous as shown in The Princess Bride, but once you let down your barriers and once you just listen, he is just warm as pie and just as sweet as such as well. And then as I grew up and started knowing him from Columbo and started watching Columbo, it took me to another level because this once upon a time grandfatherly figure I got to see grow and age in Columbo. And I got to see that detectives, or I could see that problems could be solved and murders could be brought to justice without the use of violence, without the use of guns, without the use of having to beat confessions out of people, by just using your wits and just outmatching murderers. If that makes sense.
No, it does. I think for me, I never had that connection to him as an older actor like you did with Princess Bride. My experience with Peter Falk has always been in and around Columbo. I just something about the way he plays this man, and maybe it's just because we're both Virgos, that it just something about it, the way he approaches it fits my mindset. It feels comfortable to me. And I think that's something that can really describe how Peter Falk performs in general. There's a level of comfort about him that feels genuine. And I mean, that's obviously going to be different for something like, Murder Inc., where he's a vicious hitman. But I think the wonder of watching Peter Falk is that you're going to see a complete presentation of that character as a person and not necessarily a caricature or stereotype. I think he was such a performer that, he needed to work out so many details in order to function properly. And I think that's why he stuck with Columbo as long as he did, post the cancellation by NBC and coming back to it years later. And you're right. It's also exciting to see somebody use their intellect like he does, both as Columbo and outside of Columbo. I feel, I said something, when we were doing Lady in Waiting, that it was nice to see an unarmed officer de-escalate a situation. And I still agree to that, but I'd also like to walk it back that that's something that typically happens with white people that don't happen with people of color as often as it does with white people. But I think at the end of the day, if we follow Peter's example, both as an individual and as a performer, and use our wits and our intellect more, I think we'd end up in a little bit of a better place.
I agree, John. And, it's just a lot of what Columbo is today. Again, I mean, you have to think this series started essentially in 1968, and its highlight, and when people think of this show, they think of it from being in the 70s.
Yeah.
And you think that his performance as Columbo, and not just him, of course, all the side characters, all of the foils, all of the antagonists, all of that, to think that it can still resonate with people today in the year 2020, that is just a testament to how well Peter Falk did, and how well I think that it not only was written and directed and all that fun stuff, but it's a testament to just how much and what Columbo can really bring to not only the people, but to the world in general.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But John, one thing you can say better is finishing off this mini file, the sub file, as only you can.
As always, good listeners, I have been John Soares, and on behalf of my podcast brother, the booty himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV, Anthony, to his friends, thank you for joining us in this sub file, our file management. And just once more, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Peter Falk, and you've been listening to an episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. And just one more thing. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Ludic Lounge, Anthony at RojoLoco44, and John at just_John_0891. Or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com.